Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. Imagine at 48 years old. You are faced with a life-altering decision worth $24 million. Yet why does your heart feel such a mix of emotions? From being a high school dropout to a warrior on the Vietnam battlefield, to potentially becoming a billionaire businessman, Jerry Ford's life is filled with dramatic twists and turns. When you think you've reached the pinnacle of life, only to find the foundation of your marriage and trust crumbling quietly. Such a shock is enough to make anyone reevaluate their life's journey. I was 48 years old, sitting in my office overlooking the azure waves of the Pacific, debating whether I should accept the offer I got for my company. If I did, I'd need approximately $24 million. Give or take a few thousand. I'd be wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. I'd be free to buy and do anything my little heart wished. Within reason, of course. So why did I feel so bad? Professionally, I was successful, I'd made it. But I felt like my life was all messed up. My name is Alex Ford. That's Alex with a J for Jerome. Not Gerald like the president. I come from a lower middle class, blue-collar background, and I was a complete disaster in high school. One factor, I believe, was that I found it really uninteresting. I believe I was the only student told by my guidance counselor to leave school and look for work. I believe she was growing bored of seeing my rump in her office all the time. I'll admit it, I was a royal pain in the butt. Miracles happen, I graduated from high school. Although I believe they just wanted to get rid of me so badly that they let me go. The Vietnam War was still raging and growing increasingly unpopular. But I was a gung-ho kid who wanted to make the globe safe for democracy. I had no idea what the word meant anyway. I enlisted in the army for 3 years. My father wanted me to learn a trade. He was an electrician and agreed that the service was an excellent concept. It would allow me to mature while also teaching me a skill that I could use to make a life. A funny thing happened. I flourished in basic training. For some inexplicable reason, the tight discipline, the intense physical activity, the attention to detail and so on, were alien to me but yet appealing. Perhaps it was because I excelled at what was required. I made it through basic at the top of my unit, which may not have been the best idea. Yeah. I was so good that they convinced me to volunteer for ranger training. So, I spent the following 2 months at Fort Danielning, Georgia, going through the torture of a rigorous, uncompromising period of physical and psychological training. In other words, for Vietnam, you need to appreciate that I was not a heroic physical specimen. I was just shy of 6 feet tall and weighed around 170 pounds. I maintain my fitness mostly through lap swimming, and I currently weigh only around 5 pounds extra. But they refined my body and taught me the tools I needed to survive. 2 months later, I found myself in Vietnam, which is not at all like Palm Springs. If the gods decide to give the planet an enema, Vietnam will get the nozzle. I was in that hellhole for about a year and a half before being hit by shrapnel, which broke a couple of vertebrae and caused internal damage to my bladder and surrounding area. I was released from a veterans hospital in the United States after a few months. No, I wasn't incontinent, thank God. My limp was barely evident even today. That was wonderful news. The news that I would be unable to have children had little influence on me at the time. What was considerably more important to me at the time was that I was not impotent. My inability to have children would come back to bother me later in life. So there I was, 20 years old, out of the service, and still lacking any meaningful skills. If you disregard the capacity to kill practically anyone with ease, I was living at home and unsure about what to do with myself. My father conducted some research and discovered that Drexel University provided counseling and employment programs for returning veterans, which were supported by the VA. I figured, why not? An appointment was scheduled, and I spent the entire day getting tested and interrogated. Dr. Cypress, the psychologist's name sticks with me. He instructed me to call him Dr. Cypress to shorten the story. The test revealed that I had a technical ability, so he proposed that I go to college and study engineering. I roared that was extremely fun. I informed him that I barely got through high school. He stated that he had reviewed my high school records. And despite the less than impressive reading, the results of the Army test and the battery of tests I had taken with him showed that I would be fine in college. He actually made me believe him. He scheduled an interview with the dean of Drexel School of Engineering. And before I knew it, I was enrolled in college. My father was ecstatic. And my mother could now brag a little. Remember how I mentioned that my father was an electrician? Which prompted me to specialize in electrical engineering. Coincidentally, just around this time, I received a call from Daniel Harris, a friend from my time in Vietnam. Alex. It's been a son of I'm out, John. I've left the Army. Damn, Daniel. It's nice to hear your voice. How come you went out so early? Where are you now? How are you doing? How did you acquire my number? I realized I was rambling. But it was nice to hear from him. I lost my leg. He said, job I walked on a dumb mine. Do you believe it? Geez, what a damn novice move. But that's okay, I lost a leg below the knee. And the prosthesis is excellent. I get around almost as well. I called your folks, they handed me your number. Yes, I'm in California, and guess what? You will not believe this. I have gotten admitted to Caltech. I'm going to study architecture. I'm going to get my ideal job. I'm going to become an architect. I shouted with laughter. Daniel may sound like a gangster, but he was arguably the smartest person in the group. Including the brass, I knew he had the talent. And I knew he had wanted to be an architect since he was a child. Daniel, that's fantastic. I'm very delighted for you. I presume my parents informed you what I'm doing. Yes, that blew my mind. Hey Jack, how about that? Guys like us are becoming professionals. You're an engineer and I'm an architect. Can you believe it? We talked for another half hour before hanging up the phone. Pledging to stay in touch, I sat for a long time, shaking my head and processing what Daniel had told me. Life is strange. I realized I didn't like the notion of commuting to school from home. And now that I had the GI Bill, a little medical pension from the Army, and the money my parents had saved from what I sent home each month, I could buy a studio apartment close to campus. I'm exaggerating a little when I say it's an apartment. It was essentially one room with my bed, a couple of easy chairs, an old sofa, and a closet kitchen. Oh, there was a bathroom where I could just turn around. But for me, everything was fine. I had a study area with a desk and a computer, and I spent as much time as I could on the books. I knew this was it for me. I'd either make this work, or my future would be quite dark. I didn't need an automobile. I could easily walk to class and catch the streetcar to see my parents. The first 2 years went so quickly, and I was surprised to learn that I did not fail the midterm tests. In reality, I did quite well. I was dead serious about achieving my objective of becoming an engineer and a professional. So I studied hard, which left little time for socializing. I had made some casual acquaintances in several of my classes, and we would meet up on occasion for a beer, pizza, or both. One Friday, one of the guys, Carl, stated that there was going to be a party at a sorority over at Penn, which was only a few blocks away, and he persuaded me to join him. I figured, why not? It was the weekend and I was pretty much caught up. That evening transformed my life. I met Elena. Elena, who named a girl Elena. It has to be the primary line. She looked like a rich with her fashionable jeans, top and 2 lovely little diamond earrings. My scorn was evident, I suppose. Yes, I understand it was completely unjust. But don't forget my background. She blushed as our eyes met. I instantly turned away and proceeded to fetch some beer. We discussed marriage, believing it was unavoidable. My concern was how she would perceive my sterility, my inability to father children from something I had always deemed insignificant. This has now become really concerning for me. My concerns were allayed shortly after our first chat regarding our future. Kim. Alex asked a question. I need to tell you something before we get too far into our relationship. Her voice wavered. I want nothing more in this world than to be your wife and spend the rest of my life with you. Please know that I love you. She glanced at me with apprehension in her eyes. I don't want children, Alex, she exclaimed. Please. Alex, do not hate me. I know who I am. And I know I would not be a good mother. I've given it a lot of thought. And I genuinely do not want children. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I understand if you want to split up, John. I told her I truly will. Wow. Now wasn't it a fascinating development? I grabbed Kim into my arms and comforted her. Kim. If you don't want children, then neither do I. I told her that my sterility was no longer a concern. I could bury my problems. I didn't even need to bring it up. Little did I know. What amused me at the time was Kim's casual attitude toward taking her birth control pills. Oh, she remembered most of the time, say, for 6 or 7 days, but then she forgot and skipped a day or two. The fact that she never got into problems just reinforced her belief that skipping a day or two made no difference. I was aware that this could be risky. But in our situation it made no difference, Alex. Kim stated to me one afternoon with a query in her tone. I believe it is time for you to meet my parents. I told them everything about you. And they want to meet you. Oh, I mumbled to myself. I should have expected it. I saw no way out. But I knew this encounter would not go well. They'd look at me and realize I wasn't good enough for their only child. Geez, I began to feel ill to my stomach. But I knew there was no way out of this. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday. So I was detained for 2 days. This was going to happen. I had done some research on Kim's family. They were on the social register and well known in the right circles. Bernard Van Horn controlled one of Pennsylvania's largest construction enterprises and had a net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars. Catherine Van Horn, his wife. Descended from Boston's lodges, they go back to colonial times. I was going to look like the classic pair of brown shoes for a black tie event. I had no choice, I'd have to suffer. Daddy sent the car into the city for us, a black Lincoln Town car. Naturally only the best for our little princess. Yera wasn't pleased, my attitude was negative. Kim could tell, but she simply smiled and told me not to worry. That truly reassured me. It didn't take long before the car entered a lengthy driveway that curved into a landing place in front of the house. It was a big grey stone 2-story colonial. I could see a 4-car garage over to one side. The grounds were immaculately maintained by a team of landscapers. Kim drew me from the car and took me to the front door. Dragging me inside, she shouted out, "Mom and Dad. Where are you?" Everything changed when her parents entered the big foyer. Damn, they could not have been more gracious. They greeted me like I was a long-lost family member just rediscovered. They could not have been nicer. I have to admit that I was a little confused. I really didn't expect such a nice greeting, however. Catherine Van Horn appeared to be just as warm and friendly. I could detect a trace of caution in her demeanor. There was nothing overt. But I could detect a hint of coolness that she tried to conceal. She did it well, however. And was polite and appropriate, yes. That is the appropriate word. She was around 5 feet 5 inches. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed. And had the build of a young girl despite her age. I'm guessing she was in her mid-40s. Was this Kim in 20 years? If so, I could live with it. Now Bernie was a different story, yeah. He insisted I call him Bernie Howard. Here's a guy that is probably around 50 years old. Tall, distinguished, worth a lot of money. And he insists that I call him Bernie. But that's the type of person Bernie was. I understand. I overheard the story. He could be a shark if he believed he was being pursued. And he could be violent if provoked. But he could also be one of the nicest people you've ever met. For some strange reason, he took an instant liking to me. He was captivated by my background, schoolwork, and major. I still remember his final remarks as we departed that day. "Alex, I am amazed with you. Continue performing well in your studies, you know. I could always use a decent engineer." And with that, he laughed and smacked my back. "Kim, you've got to keep her. Make sure he doesn't get away." I had a smile on my face. Just like Dopey the Seventh Dwarf. See? I told you not to worry. Kim grinned and nestled into me in the back seat of the car as we drove back into the city. I breathed a big sigh of relief and thanked the stars that it was over. But a persistent notion entered my mind. Now it was Kim's turn. She'd have to meet my parents. I grinned slightly when I compared my parents' little South Philadelphia row house to the home I had just toured. Geez, talk about contrast. I knew my family would accept her into their hearts. That was the way things were. I only hoped Kim understood that there was rich and not so rich. It would be intriguing. Kim's visit to meet my parents went well. I could see her eyes expand as she took in my parents' small row house. Kim had never been exposed to the working-class lifestyle. So this was a new experience for her. I have to admit that she handled it brilliantly. Only now and then did I notice a weird expression in her eyes, one that unnerved me slightly. Was there contempt, disdain? No. I knew Kim very well by then. She would not look down on people with lower incomes. She and my mother seemed to get along well. And before I knew it, they were in the small kitchen with Mom giving her the recipe for my favorite pot roast. I had to hold back a laugh. I was unsure whether Kim could boil water. My father seized this opportunity to lead me outside. Where we sat on the steps, he turned to face me. Alex, Kim appears to be a very nice girl who clearly adores you. I hope you will be very happy together. I could feel hesitation in his voice. I glanced at him with a query in my eyes as he went on. His expression darkened slightly. Alex, you need to understand that Kim has only known a life devoid of. What a life of privilege. I'm guessing she'll want you to provide the same kind of life without even knowing it. I know engineering can provide a solid income, but I'm not sure it will meet her expectations. Look, I could be completely wrong, but it's something to think about. He smacked my shoulder and led me back into the home. When the four of us were in the front parlor, my father took out wine glasses and announced that he had a message to make. Alex, Kim, here's to your happiness. May your life together be long and full of joy. And now I'd like to inform you that we've sold our house and are going to Florida. We purchased a little 2-bedroom villa on the West Coast. And I've been offered a part-time job. We've had enough of the chilly winters and plan to move by the end of the month. Cheers. He tipped his glass. I sat there, taking it all in when I was able to regain my voice. I laughed, told him that was fantastic news, and wished them well. I stated that they should keep the second bedroom ready for Kim and myself when we came to visit. I saw that expression in Kim's eyes again, but I dismissed it. I felt thrilled for my parents. Kim determined that between what her parents paid for her housing and what I paid for the one-room apartment, we could pull our money and get a genuine apartment nearby. Her logic made sense, so that's what we did. We were able to rent a quite beautiful apartment not far from where I was now residing. Of course, Kim insisted on a car to get her to school. So Daddy bought her a 300 Series BMW. She needed a car, so I had no reason to protest. The senior year went nicely. Kim was preoccupied with her academics and wedding planning because I had limited involvement in either. I focused on my studies and worked hard to maintain good scores. It was funny, between my schoolwork, Kim's schoolwork, and the time she spent on the phone and with her mother organizing this wedding, we spent less time together than we did before we started living together. A disturbing incident occurred around 2 months before graduation. Kim returned home and interrupted me at the computer with surprising information. Alex, I've got the job. I start part-time work next week. It's only 2 evenings at first, but if everything goes well, I'll have a full-time job by the time I graduate. Isn't it great? She gushed. This was all new to me, so I urged her for further details. She told me it was for a prominent publishing business in Center City, and she would be a probationary assistant editor following graduation. Her probation term would end, and she would resume full-time duties in that job. I moaned or whined in a small way. Chemo. We see each other so little now. It's as if we are strangers living together. It will get worse now, I understand, Jay. But this is a fantastic opportunity. Please feel glad for me, honey. It's what I've been aiming for, she pleaded. So I simply bit my lip and closed my mouth. How could I deny her this opportunity? I faked a grin on my lips and grabbed her into my arms. "You'll be terrific, honey, you will kill them. It won't be long until you're a senior editor. Once they notice your abilities." She laughed joyously and danced around the room, while I kept a fake grin on my face, wondering why I felt a chilly chill actually. It turned out very good. Kim spent a few evenings at Crown Publishing during the week, while I had late classes. So we didn't lose out on much time together, at least not any more than normal. The semester came to a conclusion swiftly, and before I knew it, the wedding date had arrived. She was going to be a June bride. I just asked a few school buddies and of course, my parents came up from Florida. I attempted to persuade Daniel Harris to come in from California, but he had a couple of finals that he couldn't miss. It was a little odd. There were over 200 guests at this soiree, which was held in one of the ritziest hotels in town, and just a few were my family and friends. I spent the entire day and evening in a daze, letting events take me along. The sole highlight of the day was a talk I had with Bernie, Kim's father, later that evening. He grabbed me aside and led me into a room off the ballroom. It was outfitted like a study with comfortable leather chairs and book-filled walls. I wondered what the hotel did with this, Alex. He began. "I know you have resumes out, but I'd like you to seriously consider working with me. I need to supplement my technical department, and I'd like you to train with Don, our head electrical engineer, Alex. This is not a handout. This is a legitimate job with plenty of opportunities for promotion. The fact that you are the boss's son-in-law will matter nothing to the guys you'll be working with. Also, I will pay you more than everybody else." He grinned at me. What the hell, I am not stupid. I saw that this was a terrific bargain for me, and it wasn't just a handout. Bernie was well aware of my willingness to offer my all. He was also aware that I felt firmly that Kim and I would have to make it on our own. We shook hands and that was our pact. My parents got us a magnificent sterling silver service for $12, which I'm sure caused a strain on their budget. My in-laws offered us a 10-day holiday to Jamaica. I felt funny about it, but I thought it would be impolite to deny or complain about them paying for our honeymoon. I had just begun to worry about the impact the vehicle horns would have on my relationship with Kim. Kim and I had discussed this a few times, and she knew how determined I was to do it on our own. She would pooh-pooh my fears, but they were very genuine for me. The only major argument we had, and it was a big debate, was about where we should reside after graduation and our wedding. Kim insisted that we acquire an apartment in one of Center City's high-rises. It would be near her workplace as well as the Van Horn building where I would be based. I attempted to explain to her that we didn't have the money for such an expense and that we'd rent a wonderful apartment near the center of town. And then once we could afford it, we might look for anything to purchase. Kim was unhappy that I refused to take help from her parents. I made it clear to her that Mommy and Daddy would not be our cash cows, would either make it ourselves or not at all. Kim recognized my stubbornness and eventually reluctantly conceded. I was winning the debate at the time, but I wasn't sure how much it would cost. We did find a decent 2-bedroom home not far from where we both worked. Kim had her car, and I could take a streetcar to work 10 minutes later. It was quite convenient. We went into debt purchasing the furnishings, but I was able to limit Kim's spending, and we had the home outfitted wonderfully in no time. Ernie stuck to his word. My work was not easy. I was presented to Don Malone, a large, heavy Irishman with a shock of white hair. I suppose he forgot more about engineering than I had learned in 4 years of college. He could have been stern, but he took me under his wing and taught me well. Did I learn? I realized that graduating from college was only the start of my career in this industry. We drafted performance requirements, created maintenance schedules, planned and designed layouts, and created time and cost estimates for construction projects. It was a training program that was quite beneficial to me as a trainee, and I adapted to it with ease. Our workweek ended at 5:00, but it wasn't uncommon for me to stay until 6:00 or later, cramming in as much as possible. Kim was similarly engrossed in her profession. She enjoyed meeting and collaborating with new authors, as well as establishing projects to bring new works to market. After 2 years on the job, she was no longer an assistant but a full-fledged editor. She was making a solid living, and we were saving as much as we could for a place of our own. Because we were not planning to have children, our aim was to purchase an apartment in one of Center City's luxury high towers, which Kim had expressed an interest in from the beginning. I also noticed that instead of enjoying our new apartment, Kim was always criticizing it, even going so far as to label it filthy. It was clear that she wouldn't be pleased until she was settled into quarters that she considered acceptable for her rank. I despised her attitude, and our friendship grew strained. Daniel Harris and I remained in touch. He kept trying to get me to move to California, but I was comfortable where I was. I also realized there was no way I could persuade Kim to move. I attempted to persuade him that getting me to move was a lost cause, but he brought it up every now and then. I had to laugh, he was such a character. It began with a phone call. It was early Friday evening, and I had quietly made reservations at one of the town's poshest restaurants. I had 24 roses delivered and they were now sitting in water in a beautiful crystal vase. I also had a small velvet box with 2 diamond earrings as a gift for my lovely wife. This was our 2nd wedding anniversary. I guess she assumed I had forgotten. She hadn't mentioned anything to me about it. The ringing of the phone interrupted my reverie. It was Kim. I'm sorry, but it looks like I'll be late again tonight. We still have a million things to accomplish around the release of Paul's new novel, and I'll be here for at least another several hours. I'll grab something to eat and meet you around 10. She rushed. She didn't even give me time to respond before hanging up. I sat with the phone still in my hand, looking at the roses on the sideboard. Was she even aware that it was our anniversary? I wondered if her job was more important to her. I thought back on the previous year. We were both preoccupied with our careers and hadn't paid enough attention to the most essential job we had, keeping our marriage alive and healthy. In the last few months, we felt like buddies sharing an apartment. Kim was virtually always at work or engaged with it. When they started working on the introduction to Paul Three's new novel, that was all she could talk about. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I was pleased for her. Although I became bored of hearing how lovely Paul was, I got the opportunity to meet him a few times and was not impressed. Oh, he was a tall, attractive man, but I sensed a bit of arrogance in him. He appeared to find it amusing that I was an engineer. I met him for the first time at a Rittenhouse Hotel function, approximately 3 or 4 months ago. Kim wore a tight black dress with no visible bras or panties. I hadn't seen her outfit that evening, but I felt worried about her being there with nothing on underneath that garment. We had hardly gotten in when she drew me over to this guy with long greasy hair and introduced me. LVL shook my hand, and I could feel the pressure he was trying to apply. He was actually attempting to bring me agony. I was taken aback and understood right then that I was dealing with a real jerk. It just took a second or two for his face to pale as I crushed his fingers, and he backed away immediately. Hello, Kim. He nearly sneered. So here is the engineer. Then he laughed. My gaze shifted to Kim, and I saw her color before hastily looking away. Had they previously spoken about me and my profession? I wondered if Kim found my profession amusing. The evening quickly worsened after that fairly contentious introduction. I saw a glimpse of Kim. She seemed to be on Level's side the entire evening. His eyes would occasionally catch mine before he wrapped his arm around Kim's waist. He was possessive and nearly dared me to object. It's funny though, a week or so later, she ceased discussing the project and was nearly completely silent regarding LVLL when I brought him up in conversation. Kim would wave her hand dismissively and shift the subject. I felt that was unusual. I began to have a strange feeling in my stomach. My face reddened as I understood what I had begun to suspect. I chuckled softly and reminded myself not to become paranoid. But that did not help one bit. Days passed as we went through the rites of marriage. Kim was clearly preoccupied, and the attention she showed to me and our relationship was nearly non-existent. She was just physically present at home, Had she even realized we hadn't made love in weeks? About a week before our anniversary, I decided to leave work on time and go to Crown Publishing. I imagined that we would have supper and talk about taking more time for ourselves. Perhaps putting our careers second for a change. I somehow rode the elevator to the executive floor rather than the one below. I had just exited the elevator when I noticed James Frust, the executive VP. He approached me smiling. "Alex. Nice to see you, it's been a while," he said. And he gently slapped my shoulder. "Hi, Jim." I responded, "I clearly got off on the wrong floor. I'm here to take my wife to supper. Hopefully if she isn't still caught up in the levels situation." "Oh no, that has been over for several weeks now. Paul is still residing in the VIP suite upstairs. But the books are now at the printer. And everything is back to normal. Go get Kim, she deserves a nice meal." He grinned and continued down the hallway. I stood there pensively before taking the steps down to the appropriate floor. I went to Kim's office and found her standing in the hallway. When she spotted me, her eyes widened with surprise. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she blurted out. "Hello." Kim responded gently. "I thought it would be good to have supper together this evening. It's been a while. So I thought we'd spend some time together for a change." I could see a flicker of displeasure. "I cannot. You know how busy I am with Paul's novel. Please be patient, this will all be over shortly. I promise, and our lives can return to normal. I will try to be home sooner tonight." She reached out and patted my cheek, then turned and returned to her office. I stood for a moment before turning and leaving. I noticed that it was almost 11:00. I suppose Kim's promise to be home by 10 p.m. was similar to previous ones. I snatched the roses and threw them. They sent a signal into the trash can. I threw the earrings in my desk drawer. I went to bed and lay awake, wondering where my life was headed. I heard the front door open at 1:00 a.m. Kim didn't take long to undress and climb into bed with me. She smelled clean and fresh, like she'd taken a shower recently. I pretended to sleep. It was at that point that I learned she was having an affair with LVLL. Yeah, I should have realized sooner. I think I simply didn't want to confront it. I didn't get much sleep that night. I had no genuine evidence of her cheating. But then again, I didn't really need any. There was no one I had to persuade. And we didn't have any major assets to battle over. The divorce would be uncomplicated. But I did not want to go into it blindly. I did want her cheating to be revealed. I suppose I was a touch vindictive. I wanted everyone to understand what she was. I lay there, allowing my mind to travel back to the days when we first met. Back to the months when we initially lived together. I had enjoyed that Kim. No, I'd adored her. Where had she gone? The tears flowed down my cheeks and onto my pillow. I got up extremely early the next morning and went to work. Despite the fact that it was Saturday, I wanted to be alone. I needed to think. I had to determine how to proceed. I knew my marriage was over, but I wanted to be in charge of how it ended. I sought proof of my wife's adultery. I realized there was no way I would be able to obtain the information I sought. I knew what to do. I was able to discover a private investigation agency that was very close to Van Horn Construction. I called and was able to schedule an appointment with one of the owners, Marge DeMarco, for that morning. I climbed the elevator to the 8th floor and opened the door to the suite of offices. As I walked in, a tall, slim woman around 50 waved me from her office across the reception area and motioned me inside. "I assume you are Alex Ford," she said. Her handshake was firm yet brief. She motioned to a chair as she stepped behind her desk. "My presence here is for 2 reasons," she said. "On weekends, no one usually comes in unless we have an urgent task. Please relax and let me know what you want us to accomplish for you." I informed her of my suspicions and provided all of the facts I had. I informed her about the VIP apartment at the publishing house. She grimaced. "Alex," she hesitated. "Based on what you told me, I would be inclined to agree that your assumptions could be valid. The problem, and it's a significant one, is the VIP apartment. If your wife is present or if we meet there. It would be extremely difficult for us to conclude that whatever evidence we obtained was illegal and could not be utilized in any court of law. I interrupted her. Marge. I'm not concerned about the legality of the evidence. I only want to validate what I already know. My so-called suspicions are much more than that. I just know my wife is or has been unfaithful. I just want it confirmed. She sat and gazed at me with what appeared to be pity. Okay, Alex, give us a couple of weeks. And we'll attempt to get as much as possible. This could be challenging. And I want you to be ready. If we say we can't get what you want. Here is a packet with information about our company. The fees we charge and a copy of the usual contract. Look it over, sign the contract. And send it back with a check. We'll start on Monday and get back to you as soon as possible. I nodded again, shook her hand and departed. It was almost noon and I decided to go home. I felt slightly better. At least I had taken some action. I did not feel like such a victim any longer. When I entered our flat, I quickly noticed Kim standing in the kitchen's doorway. Wow, I said. I was not sure whether she even realized we had won. Her eyes were flaming. And she wasted no time in handing me both barrels. God damn it, Alex, where the hell have you gone? Do you recall that it is our anniversary today? Did you remember to get me a terrible card at least? Did you remember to make at least one little gesture? I just stood there looking at her. I suppose she decided that a good offensive was the way to go. Elena, I responded quietly. Today is the 11th. Our 10th anniversary was yesterday. The roses I gave you were outside in a trash can. I had to cancel our dinner reservation. And if you go through the garbage on my desk, you might be able to find the present I got for you. I believe what you had to do last night was more significant. Especially since it required you to stay until nearly 1:00 a.m. She merely remained there looking frightened. Her eyes darted around, afraid to meet my fixed gaze. She had paled. But I could see her fighting to hold herself together. I apologized, Gia. She finally succeeded. She came to the sofa and sat down, shaking her head. I'm not sure where I am half the time. This campaign has made me really frazzled. She looked up at me and begged me to understand. It is over, Alex. The campaign has finally ended. Please try to ignore the last several months and focus on our marriage. Yeah. As if I was going to forget. What she didn't realize was that I knew the project was terminated long ago. Guilt was written all over her face. I'm not sure how I managed not to respond. I did not escalate the issue. But the tension was evident and remained throughout the week. We kept going through the motions. But there were no more late-night meetings. Kim arrived home every evening about 5 or a few minutes later. It appeared that her short adventure with LVLL was over. You know what? I didn't give a crap. The damage had already been done. I could tell Kim was genuinely trying to get our marriage back on track. I thought I could see the remorse and worry coming out now and then. For me it was too late. Was I overly proud? Are you being too stubborn? Should I have made more of an effort to save our marriage? Maybe, but her adultery and betrayal hit at my gut. The confidence that was the basis of any marriage was vanished. How could I ever trust her again? How can I ever forget? Can I ever forgive her? Who knows, but I knew I couldn't forget. With the awareness of what she had done to us, it guaranteed the end of our marriage. It had become a ruse. A few days later, I received a call from Daniel Harris. We maintained in touch and called each other on occasion. Alex, have you thought about my idea to move out here? The potential is limitless. And we could definitely use another skilled electrical engineer. Daniel had been trying to get me to move for a time. Maybe I should think about it now. I'd already dismissed the suggestion. It's an idea. Daniel, I'm not sure right now. But maybe we can discuss it again later. I left it dangling and began to get excited. But I reminded him that it was only a firm perhaps. A couple of days later, Marge DeMarco contacted me at work and asked me to stop by. I sat beside her desk refusing water and coffee. Marge began. "Alex, I have some news for you. But I'm not sure if it will make you pleased. I called you in earlier than the 2-week period I specified because we had reached a dead end. Our inquiry has shown nothing that supports your suspicions. That is why I do not have a complete written report for you. If I tried to write down all we discovered, there would be very little. And whatever there is would be disappointing. As a result, I'm refunding you a portion of our fees. The only important information I can provide you is the outcome of our investigations on Paul Lell's past. It appears that he is quite the womanizer. There have been 3 sexual harassment allegations filed against him. Everything was settled before they got to court. There appear to have been at least 2 divorces. He appears to be a very cruel character. I'm sorry we couldn't be more helpful to you. I was disappointed but resigned. I guess I didn't expect him to be that successful. Okay. I would proceed even if I did not have the desired evidence. It wasn't particularly required. I believe I just wanted some retribution. I called John Kramer, a lawyer. I was told he was out of town but would return in about 10 days. I scheduled an appointment to see him. It was time to get this over with. In the meantime, Kim and I simply tiptoed around one another. The surprise arrived a few days before my visit with Kramer. I had just returned home from work and had draped my jacket on the back of a chair when Kim burst into the house, breathless and clearly furious. "Alex, Alex, please sit down. I need to talk to you." She blurted, "I know we didn't want children. But I am pregnant. We are going to be parents, Alex. Oh honey, this can be amazing. You're going to become a parent. Please do not be furious, Alex. Please be happy for us." She stared at me, anxiety all on her face. I was completely stunned. I couldn't think for more than a few seconds. Then the absurdity of it struck me. The irony: Kim was always forgetful about taking her birth control pills. And she got caught. LLVL had impregnated her. And now she was trying to convince me that the child was mine. I was outraged. I believe I had a strong dislike for her at the time. She had created a mess. And now she was attempting to convince me that the child was mine. Strong emotions tore through me. I suddenly felt devastated. A sense of tremendous loss almost overpowered me. Overpowering the rage. I was losing control while on an emotional roller coaster. And then nothing. I felt a great emptiness, a hollow. And a chill that invaded my soul. I didn't care anymore. I simply wanted it to be over. I'll leave as soon as I've packed a few items. I'll retrieve the rest of my belongings later when you're not present, I said dully. Kim sat. And I noticed her eyes fill with unshed tears. She realized the game was finished. So she buried her head with a sob lodged in her throat. "I apologize, Alex. You do not understand how sorry I am." I was curious. I pondered what had gone wrong. Was it an inherent defect in her character? Was it me? Why, Kim? Was our marriage unimportant to you? My voice was quiet. I didn't yell. Kim looked up at me, her eyes watering. Why? I asked myself that question over and over. I am not sure. Perhaps it was the excitement, glamour, and thrill of being in the spotlight among famous individuals. Stupid reasons. I don't have any excuses. I was weak and foolish. I let myself get lowered. Not only by Paul but also by my profession and the environment. I didn't understand. I was digging myself a hole until it was too late. Tears were flowing down her face. "Alex, I am so ashamed. I'm embarrassed by what I've done and ashamed of what I just did. Lying about being the baby's father. That was despicable. I was so afraid. I sincerely apologize for that, Alex. You did not deserve that. You did not deserve any of this." Her gaze lowered to her lap. "Is there a way?" she inquired dully. She knew what the response would be. I interrupted her. "No," I responded, emotionless. "I have an appointment with John Kramer. I recommend you get a lawyer. We will split what we have. The divorce should proceed smoothly." I got up, went into the bedroom and packed a suitcase. Walking to the door, I noticed Kim was still sitting there, head down. Sobbing gently, I left. One of the most difficult things I've ever had to do was confront Bernie Van Horn and inform him that I was divorcing his daughter and submitting my resignation. God damn it, Alex, why please tell me why. Haven't I treated you properly? You are like a son to me, why are you doing this? Bernie was in tears. And I had to swallow a lump in my throat. Bernie, please, I managed to escape out. I am unable to provide you with any further information. I truly cannot. But I'm confident Kim will explain everything to you. She left me with little options. Bernie, and you are correct. You've been like a second father to me. And I will never be able to repay you for your faith in me. I wish I could explain everything. But I simply can't. I felt myself losing control again and halted. Unable to go on. I simply couldn't tell him that his daughter had been unfaithful and was carrying someone else's child. Bernie noticed my sadness. And I believed I saw a flash of understanding and pity in his eyes. He approached me and placed his hand on my shoulder. Okay, Alex, you can stop talking. Get a hold of yourself. Maybe I understand more than you realize. Do whatever you think you have to do. But you must pledge to let me aid you whenever and wherever I can. I nodded, rose, and then left his office. I spent the next week at a Hilton in town, trying to process all that had happened to me. When everything was said and done, there wasn't much to ponder about. I started divorce proceedings. I knew it would not be questioned. I took a cold, hard look at my situation and knew there was nothing left for me here. My wife and in-laws were now in the past, and my family had relocated to Florida. I made up my mind and phoned Daniel Klein. I was on an aircraft going to Los Angeles within a week. Daniel had sent my resume to his company, and I started working there just a few days after arriving in Los Angeles. I remained with Daniel and his wife Sophia for a few weeks until I could find an apartment near my job. Daniel got married at the same time I did, and he found a winner, Sophia. She didn't know me from Adam, but we'd spoken on the phone several times when Daniel or I contacted him. She was kind, polite, and welcoming. She, however, always made me feel welcome in their home. More than welcome, she was approximately 5 feet 3 inches. Well-built with dark hair and blazing brown eyes. She gradually entered my little circle of really important friends. I felt thrilled for both Daniel and Sophia. So weeks passed. I absorbed myself in my task, thankful for my work. It kept me from crying about the end of my marriage and my love for Kim. At least during the day, the nights were awful, and my sleep was riddled with dark thoughts and what-if scenarios. Sometimes I would drink myself to oblivion, and then let my rage bubble up. I would slam a couple of things against the wall before passing out on the sofa. I wanted my wife back, not the one I divorced, but the one I met and married. Was Kim's adultery at least partly my fault? Should I have stayed and tried to work it out? Was I being cowardly by fleeing? I had given those questions hours and hours of contemplation and realized that I wasn't very strong. I couldn't forgive her betrayal, and I knew I couldn't accept the child who would be a constant reminder of her adultery. Daniel and Sophia's companionship and friendship kept me on a somewhat sane path for the most part. They were continually pressuring me to spend the weekend at their house, accompany him on a camping trip, or accept a blind date in which they believed I would be interested. I was able to escape the courting attempt, but I did spend a lot of time with them at their house, and lounging by their pool in the warm sun seemed to help my mood. Bernie Van Horn would occasionally phone me throughout the months. He was sympathetic enough not to bring Kim up in our talk, but he was curious about what I was doing and how I was getting along. The funny thing was that I'd occasionally get a call from, of all people, Catherine Van Horn. She appeared really concerned about me and was pleasant on the phone. I was delighted that they both wanted to keep in touch. But then things started to turn odd at Harris's. As I previously stated, Daniel and Sophia insisted on coming to see me whenever they could. So I spent most of my weekends over there. It felt almost like being around family. No, I take that back, it felt like being with family. They were so near to me. I also liked the private rear lawn with the pool and patio. However, as time went, Daniel and Sophia grew increasingly concerned about my lack of interest in dating or pursuing people of the other gender, you understand. Women. It wasn't like I wanted to be a monk or something. I just wasn't interested. I suppose the circumstances surrounding my marriage dissolution may have discouraged me from seeking any form of connection. Oh, I had the regular cravings, but they were dealt with manually, so to speak. Sophia's bikinis, however, were increasingly brief to the point that they were practically embarrassing. Her most recent creation consisted of 3 small triangles of material that could fit inside a shirt pocket. I've got to be honest, it became tough to hide Johnny. As well, little encounters started to occur, I mean. When I'd go out of the restroom, she'd be in the hall in only a very brief bra and panties. It became very uncomfortable for me. No way in hell would I even consider making a move. I wasn't much of a pick. The unusual encounters peaked around 4 or 5 weeks after the brief bikinis first appeared. It was Saturday, and Daniel had excused himself to go to the shop for a case of beer. I had offered to leave, but he demanded I stayed. I was getting out of the restroom after taking a leak when I saw Sophia walking down the corridor. She was dressed in a short silk robe that should have covered her important parts. But the robe was wide open, and she was naked underneath. I almost twisted my ankle attempting to turn around and escape her. She approached me, grasped my hand and demanded, "Come with me, Alex, we need to chat," I stammered. "Please fasten the robe, Daniel will be home shortly. And I don't want him to get the wrong thoughts." I realized I was talking, but she was taking me down the hall and outside to the patio. "Do not worry about Daniel, Alex. He will return when I call, and in the meanwhile, we need to talk," she remarked quietly as she sat across from me. Her robe was completely open enough. "Don't feel sorry for yourself. You are not the only guy in the world who has been crapped on. And you will not be the last. You can't avoid ladies for the rest of your life. And you can't be overly friendly with your fist. If you know what I mean." And she blushed slightly at the remark. I sat there red-faced and almost panicked. Daniel would kill me and I would let him. I really didn't know how to get out of this mess. Sophia then stood, letting the robe fall to her feet. She then approached me and took my hand. "Don't worry, Alex, you're a wonderful friend. And I'm not going to screw you." Daniel and I merely assumed that this type of unexpected experience would jolt you out of your despair and lethargy. She then turned and placed her robe back on, closing and tying it. This time she sat down again and stared at me calmly. "Okay, Alex, now it's your chance to say something. I hope I did not shock you too much and that you understand that we did this out of love and affection for you." She suddenly appeared concerned and unsure of herself. "Holy," I mumbled. "That's quite severe to say the least. What are your thoughts on this?" I worried Sophia. "Smiles, don't worry. Daniel understands exactly what I intend to do and has consented. He felt that might work as well, Alex. Daniel trusts you with his life. And he does the same with me. Don't worry about Daniel's feelings. I want you to explore your emotions and realize that you need to get back into the game." Well, I suppose that worked to some extent. Daniel got home a bit later, and all he could do was smile and titter. I believe he could scarcely contain himself from bursting into an honest-to-God belly laugh. His sense of humor and joy at my discomfort relieved my guilt. Almost out of self-defense, I began accepting blind dates from the Harrises. And to my surprise, quite a few of the ladies were pleasant. And I had a good time. I also knew that these were just dates that were not going to lead anywhere. I also understood why that thing happened. I still adored Kim, I missed her terribly. How can you stop loving someone? I knew it was finished. I knew we would never be together again. But it still ached. It stung to the very core of my existence. That was my hang-up. That was the challenge I needed to overcome in order to get my life back on track. I had to bury the misery of the last few months with Kim. I had to bury my feelings for her. I needed to forget and go on. For the first time since my departure, I began to do precisely that. The love and hurt were still present. I'd simply sublimated them. I attempted to force them deep into my mind. And with time I grew increasingly effective. It wasn't long until it faded into a dim throbbing recollection that I could deal with. I also realized that if I wanted to get back into the game, I needed to be open to new options. I couldn't simply rely on Daniel and Sophia for blind dates. They would eventually run out of ladies to introduce me to. I joined a nearby fitness club and began exercising. I registered for a cooking class at the community college. If nothing else, it would help me improve my poor cooking skills. I even considered joining a library group but reminded myself not to get carried away. Anyway, Daniel and Sophia were relieved that I was back in the game. So I kept plugging away, working and going out on the rare date. I'm settling into a rut of my own creating without even realizing it. It had been 2 years since I moved to the West Coast. Was I happy? I can't answer that. I went through the motions. And I'm sure everyone saw a normal-looking guy. But I knew I was screwed. It's been 2 years. Yet I still hurt, not openly but deep inside. And I realized that the anguish would never go away. Then my world changed again. My mom called me on Thursday evening. She was crying and having trouble getting me to comprehend. But then it struck me my dad had suffered a major stroke. He died on his way to the hospital. My stomach turned and I felt lightheaded. I realized I needed to gain control of myself. I tried to phone my mother and tell her I was leaving immediately. I called Daniel and explained what had happened, interrupting his surprised sympathy. I requested him to contact personnel the next day and request that they grant me a leave of absence. I wasn't sure how long I would be gone. I packed a few bags, contacted the airport, and boarded a plane for Tampa a few hours later. We landed early the next morning, and I was able to immediately hire a car from the airport. The sun had just risen, and it appeared that it would be a hot, steamy day. It wasn't long before I arrived at the residence. There was a message on the front door addressed to me. It came from Mrs. Simmons, the next-door neighbor. She had scribbled her phone number and asked me to call as soon as I arrived. I took the note, unlocked the door, and saw the house empty. I instantly dialed the number that was still in my hand. Mrs. Simmons, this is Alex Ford. I just received your note. She interrupted abruptly. Alex, don't worry. But your mother suffered a heart attack and was transported to the hospital. The doctor said she will be all right, so keep calm. I'll come straight over and you stay right there. This was a strong woman, and my initial fear was alleviated somewhat. I remained cool and waited for her. Mrs. Simmons, or Katie as she preferred to be called, provided me all of the information she had. They were together the previous night when my mother began complaining of neck and arm aches. Being no fool, Katie immediately called 911. And when they arrived, they rushed Mom to the emergency room. She was evaluated, given an EKG, and her heart was characterized by an interventional cardiologist on call. Blockages had been detected, and she was slated for cardiac bypass surgery later this week. When Katie stopped me, I instantly started for the door. She turned me around and talked quietly but forcefully. Alex, please wait for me. Give me 15 minutes to get cleaned up and dressed again, and I'll accompany you to the hospital, rather than give you directions. I paused and sagged a little. She wrapped her arms around me, patting me on the back. Don't worry, Alex. Your mother will be okay. This is something that happens frequently down here. She is only 56 years old, so she still has lots of excellent years ahead of her. She is still a young woman. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate the assistance. I will wait for you here. Here I am. Truly appreciative for what she has done. You are a good friend. Then I carefully removed myself from her hug. Thank God my mother had close friends. We arrived at the hospital shortly after, and I had my first opportunity to see and chat with my mother. She was still in shock at my father's death. She didn't care about getting better or having surgery. I had to do my absolute best to persuade her to get the operation. I had to remind her that she was now all I had and she needed to try her best to be there for me. I appealed to her as a mother. And I think it succeeded. She consented to the procedure. She was operated on approximately 5 days later and recovered nicely. She was at home recuperating. I was amazed. I expected her to be hospitalized for weeks and then bedridden for another few weeks. Little did I know we were taking brief walks around the neighborhood a week after Mom's operation. While she was in the hospital, I handled all of the arrangements for Dad's funeral. He was buried in a suburban cemetery with friends and neighbors present. There was a large audience. He was well liked. I also noticed that the majority of the individuals there were in their 60s or older. And they were stunned by Dad's early demise. He had just turned 60 himself. I insisted that Mom not attend. She was still frail following surgery and in the hospital. I promised her that we'd go to Dad's grave as soon as she felt ready. During my time there, I was able to reflect on my immediate future. I wasn't sure about Mom's health. And I was reluctant to leave her. After much contemplation and conversations with Daniel and Sophia, I decided to resign my work and relocate closer to my mother. Daniel offered to hire a moving firm to pack everything for me and deliver it on the date I indicated. Daniel collected the majority of my personal belongings from the flat on my desk at work and shipped them to me. He also made arrangements to have my automobile shipped down to me. Thank heavens for Daniel and Sophia. Their assistance was a blessing. Mom was making incredible improvements. And I was amazed. Oh sure. She became fatigued easily and required a nap in the afternoon. But overall, she made significant progress toward her recovery. I was living with her. And with my help and that of Katie Simmons, who I discovered had recently been widowed. My mother was doing quite well. I just decided it was time for me to start looking for work. I needed a job. My expenses in the last few weeks were relatively low. But I realized I couldn't sit about on my buttocks forever. Mom was now healthy enough to care for herself. So I needed to work in this state of mind. I sat with her in the living room and told her I was going to start looking for a job. Mom looked at me and offered her opinion. Alex, I know you have some money set up and I do too. My living expenses cover the cost of this property. The expenses are not great. I have a good suggestion. Let us pool our resources. And you establish your own office. Open your own business. I am quite confident in you. I am confident that you can make this a success. We may be partners. I know how to manage a workplace. And you can handle the technical aspects of it. What say you? I was astounded. I had never considered beginning my own business. I was an engineer, not a business person. But I was interested. I immediately recognized promise in the concept. I knew there were a lot of small contractors who didn't have an engineering department and outsourced that work. Could I tap into that market? I needed to think about it and chat with a few individuals. Daniel Klein was the first. He was eager. He instructed me to go for it. I had nothing to lose. So Mom and I pulled our little funds and established a small office in town, just enough space for the small amount of work I planned to receive. I also advertised in local trade papers and made an effort to meet and introduce myself to as many local contractors as possible. Some work began to arrive slowly and steadily. Within a few months, we were incurring expenses that was at no profit. Just expenses. Then unexpectedly, I received a request for a bid on a mid-sized office building. I labored on that bid for hours and reduced my profit margin to the bone. I won the bid. I had to grow swiftly to meet the deadline, which was thankfully far enough in the future. So I had enough time to seek more assistance and complete the task at hand. To cut a long tale short, the work started coming in. And I had to expand 3 more times over the next 5 years until we occupied a complete floor in a relatively new high-rise in town. I knew I was extremely lucky. We must have had a building boom just on time. And for some reason I received a lot of work. I wasn't about to turn down such generous offers. I simply took it and ran with it. So for the first several years, I was completely focused on growing the firm, leaving little time for socializing. But after about 2 or 3 years, I had enough aid to regain my breath and reduce the number of hours I was working. I once again joined a gym and began working out. Forget about cookery classes, I did it once. And I was still a terrible cook. Thank heavens for Mom. The gym, however, provided an added bonus. I met a woman. Her name was Mary. That's correct, Mary. As simple as any name can be, Mary Susan Black. The way we met was somewhat unconventional. I was working on the weights when I noticed this gal approximately 20 feet directly across from me, short brown hair. Around 5 feet 5 inches, nice construction. Around my age or maybe younger, very lovely. She would have captured any guy's attention. She was exercising on a machine designed to improve her leg muscles. And her thighs were flexing in and out. That alone would have been incredibly intriguing. But something else was happening. She wore a leotard, a handy workout outfit. Unfortunately, it was practically ripping apart, indicating a very weak seam in the crotch area. That garment's crotch appeared to be about to break apart. She clearly had no idea what was happening to her down there. Damn, what to do? I knew it wouldn't be long before the rest of the seam ripped and the leotard snapped open, exposing her completely. I made up my mind and walked towards her. Miss, I stammered, look, I genuinely do not want to be. Damn, I sounded like an idiot. How do you inform an unknown woman that her assets would soon be on display? Thankfully, she had stopped the workout and was beaming up at me. You're not particularly good at this, are you? You absolutely should rehearse more before attempting to introduce yourself to a girl. She giggled slightly, taking any sting out of her comment. Might as well get started. I dangled over and whispered into her ear. I could see her eyes expand in disbelief, as well as her face color. She stood hastily and practically dashed into the ladies' locker room. I then left the area, had a shower, dressed, and headed to work. It was tough to get her out of my head, which was a little upsetting. She was attractive and had a great body, which reminded me that I should start dating again. I mentally shrugged and vowed myself to give it some thought. I returned to the gym the next day. But that gal was not there. Nor was she any other time that week. I assumed that the embarrassment of her exposure to me led her to pick another facility, which was unfortunate. I'd have liked to see her again, to my astonishment. She showed up the next week. I did not notice her at first, she wasn't in my area. As I was finishing up, I noticed her approaching me. Hello, she said softly, my name is Mary Black. And I'd want to thank you for warning me in advance. It would have been quite embarrassing for me. I smiled widely. You are extremely welcome. And as a reward, will you join me for lunch today? By the way, my name is Alex Ford. And I offered my hand. Mary smiled slightly and shook my hand. I suppose you are entitled to that. But I really should take you out to lunch as a token of appreciation for your bravery. Well, that was the beginning. We grew to know each other over the next few weeks. Mary was 28, 3 years younger than me, divorced, and had a 3-year-old daughter named Stacy. She worked in public relations at an advertising firm not far from the gym. We began dating, and after our third date, I met Stacy. We had lunch on a Saturday. And when I dropped her off at her condo, she invited me to come inside and meet her daughter. I was overjoyed and instantly fell in love with this beautiful little baby. Stacy looked nothing like her mother, with her blonde hair and blue glittering eyes. She was a true extrovert who quickly had me wrapped around her little finger. Mary was astounded by how well Stacy and I got along. She mentioned that her daughter did not often open up to strangers so quickly. It became apparent that seeing and playing with Mary's child was part of the fun of dating her. I liked Mary, the first actually did. But I also knew I did not love her, at least not how I felt for Elena. I also realized that was not fair. Mary was a completely different person. And I realized I was too, but I liked Mary. And I enjoyed being with her. Stacy was also included in the equation. I was crazy about that tiny kid. I felt for her as if she were my own daughter. Mary was attractive and lively. She had a strong personality, which I assume was important for her profession. But she was nice and caring. We began to develop a relationship. Although an unusual one strangely. We didn't have much physical contact, okay. There was some kissing and fumbling, but that was it. It never progressed beyond that, that's correct. I started to wonder too until one night we were in Mary's condominium. Stacy was soundly asleep in her room. Mary had prepared dinner. And I had purchased a bottle of wine instead of the usual flowers. I noticed Mary's weird expression when I handed her the drink. But I didn't think much about it. We had a lovely, peaceful meal. I had a couple of glasses of wine and noticed Mary had just taken a sip or two. Mary was bringing wine by mistake. I wondered if she was a teetotaler perhaps. Or she was simply pretending to drink because she didn't approve of alcohol. No, Alex, everything is okay really. She grabbed up her glass and drank. She swiftly emptied her glass and refilled it. By the conclusion of the lunch, we were both a little busted. We cleaned the table, stumbling into one another and laughing. We then moved into the living room and collapsed on the sofa. What happened next had me almost stunned. Mary practically assaulted me. I gladly accepted it and will repay afterward. We had crazy sex. I dropped next to her. Struggling to catch my breath, we fell asleep tired. During the night, I felt Mary rise and cover us with a lightweight blanket. The following day was Saturday, thank goodness. Because both of us wanted to get up, shower, and dress before Stacy. We didn't think Mary's young daughter should get used to seeing a man sleeping with her mother just yet. Mary prepared a small breakfast for us. And over coffee, she attempted to explain what had happened to her last night. Alex, she began, you need to understand something. The wine was the explanation for my angry behavior last night. The booze, that's why I rarely drink it. It reduces my inhibitions too much. I had a drink last night because I wanted to. I wanted us to make love. And the wine helped me do so. She stared at me with some hesitation in her eyes. Was I overly aggressive, Alex? Do you think less of me? I laughed and Drew rose closer to me. You were perfect, more than perfect. And I think the world of you. Come on. Let me show you. I took her hand and walked her back into the bedroom. We continued dating for several months and became quite comfortable with each other. I took Mary and Stacy to see my mother, who had retired from my office and no longer worked there. Mary and they got along well, but Mom adored Stacy. She treated her like she was a grandchild. We both knew there would be no others, fortunately. Stacy adored her Nana, which was another hurdle cleared. Did I love Mary? Again, difficult to say. I certainly liked her. I enjoyed being around her and I adored Stacy. I was content and comfy. We never talked about love in the future. I believe that we were both comfortable with the status quo. My life was going so nicely that I started thinking about the immediate future. It was ridiculous of me to rush to Mary's house. We discussed the situation and made the choice to buy a house. I insisted that I would spend that money to purchase us a house. My firm was going better than ever. And I could easily afford something beautiful for the three of us. We looked at a gorgeous ranch in a gated golf course neighborhood near the coast and negotiated the purchase. We were officially married 2 months after initially visiting the property. It never came up by tacit agreement. It appeared that we had no interest in that piece of paper. Both of our previous marriages had ended badly. And I believe we both wanted to avoid a repeat. Stacy was now calling me daddy, and in essence, I was her daddy. Life was good. The years flew so fast. One day blurred into the next. My company continued to perform successfully. We had established an outstanding reputation. And I was grateful to have the personnel to keep the firm growing and performing well. I didn't have to spend all of my time trying to keep it afloat anymore. Bernie and Kate Van Horn stayed in touch. And while I hadn't seen either of them since I left the area, we did manage to call at least a few times every year. Of course, I was always in contact with Beth and Sophia. Mary was doing well too. She had advanced through the corporate ranks and was now the director of public relations for her company. However, it appeared that the higher she moved, the more hours and distance she had to traverse. There was nothing extreme. She generally got home about the same time I was. Now going a few times a week. She would phone and tell me not to wait for supper because she had a meeting or something that kept her at work. Either of us would rush over to Mom's to collect Stacy until she was old enough to be left alone. Mary's journey was likewise not too extreme. She frequently had to see clients every few months and was gone for up to 3 or 4 days every month at times. But this was not cause for concern. Even after all these years together, our sex life was enjoyable. We were still able to kindle a fire in our bedroom. Stacy is a gorgeous, kind and sensitive person. My small kid grew like a tarpsy into a tall blonde, beautiful goddess. She was not only beautiful but also as clever as a whip. I'd seen her develop over the years. Fascinated by her change from a little tot to a strong, confident, mature young lady. Stacy was almost 20 years old and starting her sophomore year at an Ivy League university. My life began to spiral downwards at this point. I assume I am not that discerning. But it appeared that Mary had become, over the last few months, what word or words am I looking for? Indifferent. Somewhat apathetic, preoccupied, yeah. But there's something else. Something I couldn't put my finger on at first. I believed it was just my imagination after all. We'd been together for nearly 17 years. We had established a pattern and had grown accustomed to the way things were. What the hell was the difference? I began to pay more attention to Mary. No. I wasn't more affectionate, sensitive or compassionate. I considered myself a good buddy. While I may not have loved Mary passionately, I cared for her and wanted the best for her. I felt we had a good connection, that we cared about each other and wanted them to be happy, but something had changed. And I wasn't sure what or why. I did notice one thing. Though sex had become irregular, while we were no longer youthful love screwing like rabbits, we did manage to have sex around 2 to 3 times per week. I began to notice that the frequency of our lovemaking had decreased. I tried to remember the last time we had made love but couldn't. I concentrated. What is it, almost 2 weeks? I recall making a couple of tries but being politely denied with "I'm sleepy, honey," or "I have my period." I realized that in the last few months, we had only made love a few times. Okay. Do you know what I began to suspect? Remember, I had gone through this before and been sick. And to think that this could happen again. I chose to keep my eyes open and pray that I was absolutely mistaken. I needed to talk to Mary about what was bothering her. I needed to know. It was after dinner. Everything was cleaned and put away. And I invited her to sit in the living room. And Mary, I began, "We need to talk. Something doesn't feel right to me. Something is bothering you. Sometimes you seem to be a million miles away. And it appears that you have forgotten that I exist. I need to know what the issue is." I kept my voice mild and non-accusatory. She sat and simply stared at me. "Alex, what the hell are you talking about? Are you becoming paranoid in old age? Are you accusing me of anything? Why don't you get off my back?" She then got up and marched out of the room. I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I sat a little surprised. I certainly wasn't expecting that kind of reaction. Mary had never addressed me with that tone or amount of disrespect. My eyes expanded. That's the word I was searching for, disrespect. Over the last 6 months, I've noticed a level of disrespect, a small scorn, and possibly a hint of condescension in her tone. Was I paranoid? I did not think so. I wasn't imagining anything. I wouldn't wait as I did years ago. I would figure out what the hell was going on. I slept in the guest suite that night. The next morning she stepped out of the bedroom, red-eyed, crying and completely sorry. We kissed each other and promised never to quarrel again. That's correct. I was conciliatory and sensitive as hell. Mary mentioned that the job had become a little stressful, and they were fighting to retain a large client who was considering leaving his firm. I didn't believe what she said. Something was going on. And I was going to discover what it was. It was rare for Mary to work late 1 or 2 times a week. And it was not uncommon for her to have to fly somewhere and remain for a couple of nights. Except for the previous few months. These travels were rather infrequent. I was putting something together. Maybe I was adding 2 and 2 and getting 5. But I wanted to either confirm or deny my suspicions. I wanted to know either way. Here we go again. I believed I had checked with various contacts and had the name of a trustworthy and discreet private investigative business. I scheduled an appointment and spoke with one of the proprietors. I expressed my needs and he understood. I'm sure he had heard the same story 1,000 times. I gave him the information he needed, as well as a sizable check, and allowed them to take care of it. My friendship with Mary became tense during the next 2 weeks. We both recognized that a line had been crossed. So we were cautious around each other. No. There is no bickering, hostility, or even arguments. But we were both wary our routine did not change. She did not abruptly halt all trips or late nights. Things continued as they had been, more or less. I merely waited for any information. I needed to know in my heart what the report would say. And I was correct. Being right did not make me feel great. I felt like trash. They gave me chapters and verses, no graphic photos. Just shots of her meeting a guy at a restaurant. Kissing, holding hands, checking into motels. And leaving a few hours later. I also learned that she met him and left on her vacations. Howard Branch was 48 years old. Divorced a few years ago, 6 feet 3 inches tall. Medium build with blonde hair and blue eyes. I felt wounded and disappointed. But I was surprised that I was not as upset as I had been with my first marriage. That, however, did not make me feel any better. While I did not have a strong romantic attachment to Mary, I was comfortable with her and assumed she was as well. I was certainly mistaken. I had spent some time reflecting. Was it me? Was there something about me that encouraged this behavior? I knew infidelity was not uncommon. But having it slam me in the face twice in as many partnerships was a bit much. I questioned my ability to sort this out with Mary. I knew what the response would be. I simply couldn't. I guess I'm just not strong enough, not man enough. I could forgive a lot. But the anguish and humiliation of this type of behavior was too much for me to bear. I guess I've never learned to share. Even when I was in kindergarten. I talked to my attorney. I assumed that because Mary and I had never formally registered our relationship, we would be able to separate easily. He quickly informed me that while we did not marry technically, we did live together as man and wife for quite some time. He also warned me that if this goes to court, it may be a very messy legal situation. He advised that I speak with Mary and see if we could reach a mutual arrangement, as it would save us a lot of grief. It occurred on the following Friday. We had just completed our pizza for supper and were relaxing in the living room. Watching TV. Neither of us was watching it. How long have you been screwing him? I asked quietly. Mary looked up surprised and paled significantly. I watched her eyes fill with tears, which she quickly brushed away. I could see her pulling herself together. I apologize, Alex. I hoped you would not find out. Her eyes swelled again, and tears streamed down her face. How long, Mary? I knew his name, Howard Branch. I know it was hurting you and I didn't care. She bowed her head and the tears continued. She did not love him. I knew it was an error. I knew I'd be sorry. I could not stop Alex. I could not say no to him. It was just like when we first met and were married. I knew he was bad for me. But I couldn't stay away from him. I was unrelenting. Answer my query, Mary. Do you love him? Do you love him? I do not know. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure why I began with him again. I knew it was an error. I knew I'd be sorry. I could not stop Alex. I could not say no to him. She was crying, gasping, and attempting to catch her breath. Her nose was runny. She seemed disorganized. I got up and fetched her some Kleenex. I felt deflated and wrung out, damn. I also felt bad for her. My wrath had subsided. I knew I was playing with a losing hand. Mary was no longer Mary. She was someone else now. Whether she realized it or not, I was exactly back where I had started, on the wrong end of another romance. I'd had enough. Even though she wasn't the love of my life, I was upset and disappointed in her. I was absolutely horrified by the lying, cheating, and contempt. I deserved better than that. Okay. I was feeling a bit sorry for myself. So what? It was unfair. I suppose not everything in life is fair. I'm staying in the guest suite tonight, Mary, I replied dully. I would love it if you could move out as soon as you locate your own apartment. We'll simply tell people that we drifted apart and decided to move on. People like my mother and of course Stacy. That would not be easy. I stood up and shuffled like an old man toward the bedroom. I got up early the next morning and headed to work. I tried to keep my mind off my personal pain and not let it interfere with my work. Yeah, like it was going to happen. I returned home that evening and Mary was gone. She had packed most of her clothes and personal belongings. It was almost as if she'd never been there. Oh yes. She left something, a letter. Dearest Alex, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for the pain I have caused you. You have had nothing to do with my disgusting behavior. I attempted to tell you last night. I'm not sure why I can't shake this fascination, this addiction I feel for Howard. I know he'll eventually destroy me. I had promised to never see him again. But I'm not sure if I have the strength to uphold that vow. You have always been nice and loving. None of this is your fault. You are the loveliest and most compassionate man I have ever met. And throughout the years I've grown to adore you. I know we have an unspoken agreement about this. But you must know that I adore you. That makes what I've done to us even more cruel and unimaginable. I'll be gone by the time you read this. I will send for the remainder of my belongings as soon as possible. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me eventually. I was not strong enough to stop my dishonesty and betrayal. Please do not hate me, I beg you, Alex. Please do not hate me. All my love, Mary. I sank into a comfortable chair and let the letter flutter to the floor. I felt completely weary. I knew I'd miss Mary. She had been a part of my life for a long time. But in another way I was relieved that she was gone. I believe I craved solitude at the moment. I did not want to be responsible for another person in my life. I needed some solitude. I needed some time to collect my thoughts. Another thought that crossed my mind: I had a job to do. A task I couldn't let undone. Call it vindictiveness. Call it vengeance, who cares what it's named. I wanted to do this. Not just for Mary but also for myself. She needed to begin a fresh life without difficulties. I was determined to make sure she had that opportunity. I had his address and was confident that it would not be difficult. I was going to take care of Mr. Howard Branch either way. And I was going to do it tonight. I immediately changed clothes and was out the door in less than 10 minutes. It took around 45 minutes to get to his home, which was in a less affluent part of town. His apartment complex appeared filthy and decrepit. I knocked on his door and waited. The door opened. And I had my first sight at this maggot. He was a large man who did not appear to be overweight. I instantly placed my palm on his chest and pushed, knocking him off balance. He staggered back into the flat and I entered, closing the door behind me. He regained his equilibrium and looked at me. I'm going to rip your head off, you little crap, he yelled clumsily, approaching me. 5 seconds later he was moaning on the floor. I let him collect his breath before pulling him into a sitting position and explaining the problem. Listen attentively, Howard. My name is Alex Ford. My friend's name is Mary Black. Do you understand what I've said thus far? I hit him harshly and he nodded swiftly. Good. I continued. I'm going to show you what suffering feels like. Howard, I'm going to put you through a lot of suffering tonight. But I won't leave many scars on you. I do not want to mark you up. I then did exactly that. After about 20 minutes, Mr. Howard Branch had vomited up twice and was pleading with me to stop. I went into his small galley kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, which I tossed in his face. I then filled the glass again and allowed him to drink. I then sat down and turned his face towards me. I made sure he was alert and explained everything to him. Okay, Howard, here's what you'll do. You're going to pack up your belongings and leave this location via the southeast region of this country. I strongly recommend that you try California, Oregon. Or perhaps Washington. Because if I discover you here in 24 hours, I will ensure that you never leave your wheelchair. I'll make sure you're disabled for life. That is only for beginning, Howard. Do you completely comprehend what I'm saying, Howard? Look into my eyes and say you understand. He did so and nodded as vigorously as he could. I left and drove home. I stripped and took a half-hour shower. I felt sickened by what I had done. Was I as bad as that intellectually? I argued that my actions would be extremely beneficial to Mary. She wouldn't have to deal with Branch anymore. But deep down, I understood that the methods I used were animalistic and that they were at least in part a kind of revenge for fouling up my life again. I shook my head the hell with it. I wasn't going to obsess about it. I did what was necessary and was willing to accept the consequences. Mr. Howard Branch was gone the next day. Speaking with my mother and then Stacy was difficult. They couldn't understand, so I didn't go into depth. Stacy threatened to fly home. But Mary and I persisted and eventually encouraged her to stay at school. We discussed it later when I spoke with my daughter again. I assumed Mary had finally informed Stacy what had transpired. She appeared quiet and forlorn. I'll always adore you, she said, you father. She had spoken to me and filled my heart. So days and weeks passed. I moved on with my life. That's how things were. I realized I needed to make a decision regarding the firm. Should I sell it or not? The prospective buyer was patient. But he was not going to wait indefinitely. He'd instructed me to take my time, there is no haste, he said. But he did give me a date by which I had to make a decision for him. That date was quickly coming. I had 1 month. On one hand, I wanted to sell and be relieved of the obligation. However, it was the only thing in my life that gave me any sense of purpose. What would I do with myself if I sold? So I procrastinated. Finally, 1 week before the deadline, I called to cancel the buyout. I'd keep the companionship. Weeks moved into months. And I got pensive as I realized I was now more than 49 years old. With the half-century milestone not far away. What did I have to show for 50 years? Yes. A successful corporation. A young lady who was nearly like a daughter to me. Stacy called once a week despite living alone. Did I miss Mary? Sure. But it became practically identical to missing Daniel and Sophia. We'd enjoyed several excellent years together. But the last I heard, Mary was doing well at work and dating. She would find somebody. Did I mind being alone? Not really, I told myself. I suppose I'd become used to it. Alex, I heard Gail, my secretary, over the intercom. You've got a guest. I was heavily involved in the specifications for a planned job. I was abrupt with her. Damn, Gail, I'm busy. Take care of this for me, she persisted. Alex, I believe you'll want to see him. It's Bernard Van Horn. And I could sense laughter in her voice. Everyone knew who Bernard Van Horn was. I hesitated for a long second before leaping to my feet and rushing out the door. They were standing beside Gail's desk, tall and lean, with white hair, appearing much younger than his 70 years. Bernie Van Horn. I grabbed him in a bear hug. The lump in my throat prevented me from speaking immediately. He hugged back and massaged my back. Okay, Alex. Let me get some air into my lungs, he laughed. I took a step back and simply gazed at him. Damn. We'd maintained in touch. But this was my first sight of him in perhaps 20 years. I soon led him into my office. And we sat in the little area there. I was still unable to trust my eyes. We spoke and kept each other up to date. I knew he'd lately sold his company. He informed me that he and Kate had relocated to Naples, further along the west coast, a couple of weeks back. They'd been talking about it for a few years but had never taken action. On a whim, they flew down a month ago to look at some Gulf front houses. He fell in love with it and purchased it. Is it that quick, Bernie? Inquired about my business and what prompted my decision not to sell. I explained my reasoning. And he nodded in understanding. Alex, you know you'll have to come down and see us now that we are so near. Kate would be quite upset if you didn't. I promised him I would, and we talked some more. I talked about how I started my company on a low budget and nearly scraped by before getting a few breaks. I noticed a glint in his eyes. And suddenly the light bulb went on in my head. My God, what kind of was I never suspected. But I should have. It was Bernie. He provided my eye the push it required. I stumbled over myself in attempting to communicate my gratitude. Do not be stupid, Alex. All I did was request a couple of favors. You took the ball and ran with it. And everyone recognized the quality of your effort. Your company's success was built on your ability and hard work. He dismissed me as having done very little. There was a pause in our discourse. And I noticed him looking at me expectantly. I knew what he was waiting for. And it was about time. I truly wanted to know. I was not only intrigued but also scared. I realized that by opening that box of worms, I would expose myself to additional misery. Bernie, how's Elena? Is she okay? Is she happy? I sincerely hoped she was well. Bernie sat back and breathed softly. I've been waiting for you to ask, Alex. Thank you for asking. Kate will be very pleased that you did. Now about Elena. Bernie shuffled in his chair. Paused briefly, appeared to collect his thoughts. Then continued, it's been a while since you left. And a lot has happened to her. I steel myself, knowing that her child has grown for some reason. I assumed she had married and started a family. I really didn't want to hear that. I really didn't want to hear that, Alex. Bernie said. Kim lost her baby about a month after you departed. She miscarried. The physicians informed her that she would be unable to conceive again. I don't recall why. I'm not sure I comprehended it back then. She had previously resigned from her work at the publishing company. The divorce, miscarriage, and aftermath left her clinically depressed. No, it's not your fault, Alex. Do not even begin to blame yourself. Kim's situation was entirely her fault. And she was well aware of it. Her world was completely wrecked. We were quite concerned about her safety. And it took months and months of treatment for her to eventually open up. In a sad and tragic sense, what Kim let to happen altered her. She developed greater maturity, responsibility, and compassion, if that is the word I am looking for. I wasn't sure what to say. This was completely new knowledge. I was shaken by what Bernie had just told me. There were feelings seething inside of me. But I couldn't identify them. But one thing was certain: Kim continued to elicit emotional responses from me. Just talking about her did it. Bernie shuffled in his seat again. Kim approached us after things had calmed down. And she appeared to be on the mend. She told us that she wanted to return to school and study medicine. Damn. We were startled and assumed that this was another aspect of her despair. She assured us that she had given it a lot of thought. I did a thorough investigation and was quite interested in doing this. To shorten the story, she enrolled in Penn's medical school and earned her MD. She went on to specialize in pediatric oncology. She informed us that she knew she'd never have her own children. So she wanted to be close to them and help them. Bernie paused and fixed his gaze on me. I literally did not know what to say. Kim had truly loved her job as an editor. That was the first indication that she had resigned. Perhaps her pregnancy was the cause of this. She must have been devastated to lose the baby. Although I couldn't conjure any genuine sadness about how she became pregnant. The rest of what Bernie told me astounded me. She couldn't have children, had become a physician. And was an oncologist. A pediatric oncologist at that. Was this the Kim I knew? It was difficult to make sense of all of this. Do you want to hear one of the reasons we moved here, Alex? Bernie asked. Probably the main reason: we wanted to be near Kim. We wanted to live near our daughter. I glanced at him blankly. Near her. What do I sound like? I was receiving so much information that I felt overloaded. Kim is here, I thought to myself. Kim had accepted the position of Chief of Pediatric Oncology at the Cancer Center at the University of Tampa. She's been on the job for a few months now. Bernie informed me, Alex, do you want to see her? Say hello, maybe no, don't panic. She had no idea I am here. She would be furious if she realized I had proposed that. But she is aware that you are in Tampa. Do you think that's what influenced her to accept this position? He teased, and I noticed a glint in his eyes. Alex. All jokes aside, I'm very sure she'd have accepted the post regardless because it was what she wanted. But knowing you were here made her pause. It's not like she didn't want to see you. She did not want to complicate your life with her presence. I simply sat and shook my head. I needed to comprehend everything Bernie was telling me. It was simply too much. Bernie noticed my confusion and rose to his feet. Okay, Alex. I understand that I just unloaded a lot on you. Consider your options, you are aware of this. I will be in touch. I had the foresight to rise with him and accompany him to the door. I watched him walk down the corridor and then returned to my desk and asked Gail to ensure that I was not disturbed. I had a lot to think about Kim. Kim is actually in Tampa. And I felt my heart rate rise and my breathing quicken. I knew what questions I needed to ask myself and answer. What were my feelings for Kim? Do I still love her? I had avoided thinking about these questions for years. But suddenly they were demanding answers. I'm no idiot, I wasn't going to lie to myself. I knew I loved Kim, but I adored the Kim I married. How did I feel about this new Kim? The physician who was now in her mid-40s. I knew I needed to see her, meet her, and talk to her. Bernie and I stayed in touch. I made it a point to pay him and Kate a visit at their Naples house. And I was both relieved and disappointed that Kim was not present. I wanted to visit Kim, but I was afraid. I was afraid of how I might feel or what I might not feel. I was a disaster. Kate called on Saturday morning and asked me to come down for the day. It was sunny and hot. And I had a few bathing outfits. I packed a clean shirt in a suitcase and had a wonderful journey down Interstate 75. It wasn't long before I let myself in the front door and screamed out their names. Moving into the spacious sunroom at the back of the home, I noticed Kim standing near the sliding glass doors. My breath got locked in my throat. She was about 20 feet away from me. Sunlight cast a silhouette. But I was sure it was her. My mind suddenly returned. She appeared to have remained unchanged over the years. Still trim, taut, and well-groomed, I approached her. And we stood looking at each other. Kim. I spoke quietly, hello, it's nice to see you. And she extended her hand. I accepted it. And we shook as if we were strangers meeting for the first time. And in a way we were, Alex, Kim added. We didn't mean to deceive you with my visit here today. I begged my parents to allow me to do this. I really wanted to see you. I hope you're not furious with me or them. No. Of course not. I reassured. It's good to see you again, Kim. You look beautiful. Then I spoke spontaneously. I was curiously relieved to see her color and grin briefly. We went into the saloon and sat at a white wicker arrangement around a modest glass-topped coffee table. Our talk began clumsily, halting at times, and punctuated by longer than necessary pauses. But it did not last long. After a few false starts, we both chuckled, understanding how weird this was, and then relaxed slightly. The talk began to flow more naturally. Kim told me about her profession, and I told her about what I'd been doing for the past 5 years. She already knew about Mary. I gathered that Bernie and Kate had told her about it on the conscious plane. My mind was operating on 2 levels. I joined in on our talk as it was on another. I was analyzing Kim and attempting to get a sense of her personality. Despite her advanced age, she still looked good. She was dressed casually in a cotton polo and khaki shorts that highlighted her tanned legs, which still put most to shame. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and there were fine creases around the corners of her eyes and mouth. She looked great, but her eyes were odd. I had never witnessed such calm maturity, confidence, and tranquility. She was confident, talented, professional, and at ease in her own skin. This was not the Kim that I had known and married. It wasn't the Kim I divorced and left. This was a completely different woman. And I knew she was someone I wanted to get to know. We spent the day conversing, eating lunch that she prepared, and relaxing by the pool. I felt myself warming to her on a variety of ways. I was drawn to this woman for the same reasons I was when we were younger. But she was so much more today. It was nearly dusk when I recognized what time it was. "Kim," I inquired hopefully. "Do you want to eat dinner with me?" She smiled. "Alex, I'd love to. But I have to be at the center tonight. Can we make it tomorrow?" We did. And we've been dating for the last 2 weeks. Is dating the right word? I knew I adored Kim. I guess I've always loved her. And I adore the woman she's grown into even more. Does she feel the same way about me? We haven't even begun to explore such sensitive topics. We were only dating as pals. The only physical contact we've had was sweet kisses to conclude the evening. Where will this all end? I don't know for certain. But I'm hopeful. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.